Hello everyone, with the release of a new patch, that also means the start of a new beta cycle. This time around, judging by my unskippable thumbnail, we have Madame Pearl, our first Ice Elation. Oh, almost got me there, but not today. On a serious note though, let's take a look at our initial kit and see what it means for our units. Does this Elation sustain ice help solve some Super Wolf issues? Is she flexible? And how good is she really? Because what's so interesting is that half the posts I've seen right now are claiming that she's an E2 merchant in high key doo-doo water, and others saying she's very OP. So let's see what's actually going on. To start off, I want to go over her sustain capabilities, because comfort does matter towards a unit's value. And with Pearl, she's gonna be an elation healer, so all the previous leaks about preservation or path swapping were unfortunately wrong. Now, she does this in two ways. Her basic attack or skill to heal, scaling based on her defense. We're gonna sit around 2600 or 3600 defense depending on if you go Shroomy or her signature. Now, for my video though, I'm gonna average it out and say 3k because it's a pretty nice number. By the way, you're gonna be running either 1 to 2 defense main stats, just as a heads up. Anyway, as for the healing, her basic will be healing around 400 HP for the entire team, and an extra 400 for the most hurt ally. Now, if you skill instead, this will jump to 600 each time. But as you could probably tell, this is kinda doo-doo water, which it is by itself. However, when paired with her talent, you're gonna be pretty tanky. Pearl's main gimmick is that she counts Certified Banger as these things called repellency stacks, which outright block 8% of the damage taken, 60% in fact. So assuming we had max stacks, we'd be able to block 6k damage out of 10,000. At the same time, if we were to ever drop below 50% HP, we now get a damage reduction modifier put on us. So while it's not highest in levels of sustain, which would make you functionally immortal, for the most part, you generally shouldn't die. Now, when you take damage, this also consumes her Certified Banger, which actually does fuel Evanescia, which is really awesome. Now, I advise you to only use her as a sustain in a mono elation team. And that's because of her ult, and also her second gimmick. When Pearl ults an ally, they'll be designated as the aesthetic archetype, and depending on how many elation units there are, the ally will either get a scaling action advance or a whole extra turn. So for y'all Wave and Ashblade players, you're gonna just have to stick with Hyacinth for now. Yeah, just put the Hyacinth in the bag. And this is with the rest of the kit in mind, by the way, and not just the fact you can't get this extra turn. Now, with this extra turn, the ally of choice will get 30 Certified Banger as well as 60 Punchline. However, only for this one extra turn. Thankfully, footage has been released by this time, so I'm 100% sure of how it works. Basically, this Punchline will not transfer to AHA, with the main buff of the time actually just being that 30 Certified Banger. However, Evanescia and Silverwolf can still make use of this. This is because the instant Punchline is gained, it's transformed into hidden MMR or energy, which once it's there, it will not be removed like the Punchline or Banger. For Evanescia, it's basically the same thing but with Certified Banger. As such, she'll gain 30 energy, not counting energy recharge. Okay, but what does that actually mean for us though? Does this solve Silverwolf's issues? Well, the answer is kind of. While this extra turn is good for Silverwolf, as it's an extra turn, there's actually nothing in Pearl's kit that helps Silverwolf with her Banger state uptime, including this extra turn. At the same time, you generally should only be ulting with Pearl after Silverwolf exits her form, reducing downtime as opposed to more damage. Imagine Mortanax Blade saving his ult instead of using it to instantly enter his form. This is basically just that. So, Silverwolf does her 3 basics, exits her form, then you immediately pop Pearl's ult, and while Silverwolf's in her extra turn, you can ult as you just got 60 Punchline. In this regard, it's really nice and also confirmed by footage. Basically, just imagine using Boot Hill where you skill and then you buffer the ult. Now, less downtime in itself is very nice and would result in a damage increase. This way, you don't need to waste Yaoguang ult to get Silverwolf back in her form. Now, if you do Pearl ult while Silverwolf's in her enhanced form, she does get an extra turn to attack. However, this actually does consume one of her 3 charges. Yes, it's not like Silverwolf's E2 where she gets an extra turn and basic attack charge. It's only an extra turn. With that in mind, it's a decent buff to Silverwolf, but nothing too crazy in my opinion. If your Silverwolf is E2, then this does become tempting to use when she's in her form, as that extra punchline does actually give her more turns. However, you will suffer from her pound downtime instead. So unfortunately, you can't get the cake and also eat it. But what about Evanescea? Well, she gets an extra skill plus that 30 banger plus 20 from Pearl, so around 90 energy when excluding energy recharge. This by itself literally makes it more than Huohuo. However, because Yaoguang and EMC can't get the energy, it is slightly worse. However, with the later stuff we'll see, just know Pearl is absolutely disgusting with her. But to summarize this section, Pearl's ult at the moment removes Silverwolf's uptime issue at low Eidolons. However, at higher costs such as E2, then you're gonna have to choose between more damage and shit uptime, or better uptime, but you can't hit that E2 peak. For Evanescea, we just get an extra skill and around 100 energy. Moving on though, I want to talk about her punchline and banger generation. Pearl actually makes 0 real punchline in her kit as opposed to other Elation units. Yes, she only makes certified banger. For Silverwolf, this means no energy per turn. However, that ult does generate 60 fake punchline in the sense, so it's actually fine for her. However, the implication of this is that she can't contribute to a high instance. So for future Elation DPSs who focus on Elation skills, avenging, then she won't be that good for them. At the same time, this actually shafts Evanescea a little bit, because Evanescea loves punchline even more than Silverwolf. Her energy gain via punchline is proportional to the amount of Elation allies, as punchline is converted to certified banger but then given to the entire team. So when Pearl ults and grants herself 20 banger, that's just 20 energy for Evanescea. However, if it was punchline, then that becomes 80 energy if you have 4 Elation allies. By the way, if Pearl's ult actually gave 60 real punchline, then that'll be roughly 340-ish energy for Evanescea, which would of course be a tad bit broken, which is why they're not doing that. At the same time, Pearl also has her Trace too, where she gains 5 certified banger per ally turn. Even though visually and practically she is capped at 50 certified banger, she actually can still produce this banger for someone like Evanescea even when she's at 50 stacks. Now, because of Pearl's designation as Elation, Evanescea jumping from 3 to 4 Elation allies will still be getting roughly 33% more energy via punchline, plus the ult and Trace 2 as mentioned earlier. Overall, it's kinda like a side grade to Huohuo in this manner, more energy for Evanescea, but a bit less for the entire team. Okay, not gonna lie, so far, just a bit underwhelming. And even more so is the fact that Pearl has absolutely 0 buffs in her base kit. Yes, she's our first sustain in a while that doesn't give any stat amps at E0S0. So while Hyacin gives AoE HP, or Dianheng PT gives attack to an ally, well, Pearl doesn't have any of that. Instead, she has something much better, which makes her even stronger. However, before we talk about that, let's actually quickly go over her gameplay loop. To give the TLDR, we now have Trace 3, which after Pearl ults and then an Elation ally ults, Pearl will now get 90 fixed energy out of her 180 cost ult. Now if we run an ER rope plus planar in 2 turns with 2 Ahai instants, we get 93.3 energy out of the 90 we need. As such, we can very consistently get 2 turn ults, which is pretty insane. Now, you can also build something like a 160 plus speed Pearl who's a bit out of sync with Aha, who's generally around 140. So if you decide to build Pearl like that, you will need to be hit once as you're only getting one Aha instant instead of two. So the final rotation's gonna look something like this. Pearl ult, ally ult, 2 Pearl basics, repeat. Very clean setup. Now, syncing this up with Silverwolf seems a bit weird to me at the moment, which I'll figure this out once I do my own testing. So with that out the way, what's this secret that makes Pearl OP in my opinion? Well, Pearl's action advance is pretty nice, but she has literally 0 buffs. Instead, she has insane multipliers at the moment. If we take a look right here, we can see that when she does an ult, she gets access to her enhanced basic attacks, which deals 60% elation to all enemies. For reference, Yao Guang's talent explicitly states 1 random bounce instance, while Silverwolf mentions split damage. However, for Pearl, it doesn't say that. As such, it's per target at the moment. And this number is nuts because it scales with the marked ally stats. For reference, Evanesia's optimal ult in AoE deals 288% Elation MV. Pearl, on the other hand, literally copies Evanesia's stats and deals 300% in AoE for all of her basics. Now, judging by the footage, she likely can't copy certified banger stacks, but instead everything else. So instead of like 3 million per basic, it's more like 1 million per basic. Which, by the way, is still freaking insane. Now, she is an AoE unit and not bounce, so she doesn't perform too well in single target, but absolutely crushes it in AoE. So yeah, there's that. But not only that, we now also have her Elation skill. Now this will be our first supportive Elation skill. We're assuming for Elation allies, after Pearl casts this skill, the next ally attacks will deal 40% elation per enemy, scaling on the ally stats. And with Pearl having the lowest participant ID, the current elation skill your team's doing will be amped. Now, there's currently a debate on whether it's a flat 40% MV per target, or just a final damage increase due to translation differences, but for now, I will lowball it and go with a flat MV, but I'll make sure to have a pinned comment if I figure it out in the meantime. In single target, it's going to be 160% MV per rotation, which is kinda dookie, but in AoE, that's 800% elation MV, which is equivalent to 3 Evanesia ults, 2 fully charged Wave and Elation skills, or 1.5 Super Wolf Elation skills. Yeah, pretty dang nice. However, this is just raw MV and actually not taking into account the fact that it will be based on per individual. So say you had Evanesia with Yao and EMC, but Yao and EMC are built as full support. As such, it's gonna be pretty mediocre. However, if you for some reason decide to get the top 1 Yao Guang build and probably EMC too, then this is gonna be very yummy. And this is also why I'm planning to build a full DPS Pearl. While a lot of her damage is scaled from her marked ally and their stats, her Elation skill will make her basic attacks via her own scaling hit pretty dang hard. And yeah, that's almost her entire kit. Here's her Trace 1, which gives her Elation scaling based on her defense. If you build her support, then this is technically useless pre-E1, but for us DPS Pearl wanters, this is really awesome. While I normally don't review Eidolons in V1, because this is a pretty short and simple video, it can't hurt to go over it. At E1, she gives 60% elation to her team if she hits 75% elation herself. Now this widely depends on your DPS and supports, but using my Evanesia as reference, who hits around 166 elation, this will be around a 22.5% damage increase for me, which is actually in line with other E1s such as Tribute or Black Swan, who are both sitting at 24%. However, for someone like Silverwolf who has a higher base elation, it's likely sitting around 15 to 18% if I had to eyeball it. Overall, it's a pretty nice Eidolon and a solid stat boost if you're into that. As for E2, it's also pretty strong, but nothing too OP. We finally get merrymaking pre-E6, which we can just treat as a final 15% damage multiplier. At the same time, the other two allies now get 30% action events every 2 turns, which I guess is pretty nice. Sadly, it's not team-wide, but that's maybe just me asking for too much. Also, her ults will now provide 60 banger and 120 punchline for Evanescence and Silverwolf respectively. Again, just keep in mind how Superwolf will still have to choose between using either Pearl's ult during or out of her form. As for Evanescence, 30 more energy is whatever. And yeah, that's Pearl GPT, our first isolation. Sorry, I couldn't help it. Anyways, as of V1, she's tier 0. What a surprise. She's easily the best sustain option in one of the best teams right now. While she didn't really improve Evanescence or Silverwolf in the way that many people were expecting, like extending the banger state or just making a lot more punchline, well, her straight up adding MVs is really freaking good. If you're a mono elation user, then picking up Pearl is just a no-brainer. It's like picking up Hyacinth for your mono remembrance or Dahlia for a break. Don't think, just pull. And yeah, now that's the entire video. Pretty short and sweet all things considered. If she gets nerfed, I honestly wouldn't be too surprised. Perhaps nerf that LOT of MV just a tad bit, and we'll be in a pretty good spot. Now, I'll do my own testing once I can, and will maybe stream the results or just go over my discoveries like next week. However, I'm not too sure, so don't hold me on that. Besides that though, I hope this video gives y'all a pretty good idea on how Pearl works and how good she is. A like or sub would be pretty awesome, but besides that, thank you guys so much for watching and peace.